Reformed Church.
Numbers 21 and verse number, I guess verse number 4 is fine. This is the people of Israel, and it says that they then journeyed from Mount Or by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. And the soul of the people became very discouraged on the way, and the people spoke against Moses, against God and Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and our soul loathes this worthless bread. It is an interesting thing where this goes, right? They see one symbol of the Lord, right? They see one symbol of the Lord, and they loathe it, right? They've grown to despise it. Yet it is given to them as a shadow of Christ, right, who was to come. So if they were to learn what the Lord had been wanting to teach them, it had been teaching them, they would see, they would be being fed physically, but they would also be growing in their understanding as they allow the Lord to teach them what these things mean, because it wasn't just the Lord supplying their need, but it was also Him teaching us, right? The Lord is not just about us having our need met. The Lord is about you can give something to eat to someone, but the Lord wants you to know Him, right? The Lord wants to reveal Himself to you, right? So it says, so they see the sign that they have been given, the manna, right? And it says they loathe this, and to them it was worthless, which is interesting. And that word worthless there is contemptible, right? Worthless bread. So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that He take away the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. Hold on, I just wanted to see something there real quick. That's fine. And make a fiery serpent, set it on a pole, and it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And so it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. So it's interesting. There's two symbols here, right? There's the manna, and then there is the serpent on the pole, right? The serpent on the pole, just like Christ, right, who became a curse for us, right? And the Lord says, curses anyone who hangs on a tree, right? And He became that cursed thing on a pole, right? A serpent on a pole. And so there's two symbols, the manna and the serpent, yet the manna they despised, and the serpent, obviously, because they, especially in a time of need, they prayed, they said, oh, we've done something wrong. And obviously their reaction to we've done something wrong is not really an understanding of what they've done, right? They didn't receive, a revelation from the Lord about Christ, and they say, my gosh, the one that we've despised is Jesus, right? That's not how it happened. They just know that they're getting bit by serpents, so God must be angry, so therefore we must have sinned against the Lord. So they go to Moses and say, we've sinned against the Lord, but not because they've come to any understanding, not because they've come to any revelation of Christ after what happened, right? But so it's not that they went from not listening to the Lord to getting bit by serpents and then to listening, right? That's not how it happened. So they despise one shadow of the Lord, right? And then they see another, right? And yet, even though they are made well, right? They don't get it, right? They don't see it. They don't see what it represents. They don't understand. So even though it's the same gospel that we hear, right? It's an interesting thing that when we hear that verse, that the same gospel that was preached to us was preached to them, but yet that they didn't enter into their inheritance because of unbelief. Yet we hear that today, and we think that only applies backwards, right? That the same gospel that we hear is the same gospel that they heard, yet it didn't profit them. But the same people that say that believe that it's profiting them today. But yet, even though you are saved, right? You are saved and you have an inheritance on the inside of you. Obviously, speaking to believers first, right? If you have your inheritance on the inside of you, is the inheritance profiting you at all today, right? And it's an interesting thing how soon it is that we forget. In other words, the Lord said to the people that when they enter in to the land, and so they have come into their inheritance, right? They enter into the promised land and they have come into their inheritance. After they have prospered within the inheritance that God has given them, he reminds them, don't forget, right? He reminds them, right? He's telling them, don't forget. In other words, allow me to continue to teach you, right? Let me continue to teach you and continue to grow in the knowledge that you have, even though you have entered into your inheritance, right? And that's the whole picture of them entering into the land of Canaan. The Lord is saying to them, when you have built houses and you have grown and you have prospered, don't forget that it is I that have given you the power to get wealth, right? It's an interesting thing how sometimes as believers, right, we start off, again, and we've been here many times, we start off on the right path, right? We start off in the gospel. We start off hearing what the Lord has finished for us, what the Lord has done for us. And then somewhere along the path, we start accepting teachings. We start accepting symbols, right? We start accepting things that let's just talk about symbols for a second, right? And actually, let me bring you quickly here to, I think it's John. Well, it's actually in Corinthians too. So 1 Corinthians 11:24. 1 Corinthians 11:24, and it says, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and he said, take, eat. This is my body which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. After the same manner, he also took the cup when he had supped, saying, this cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do you as often as you drink in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you show the Lord's death till he comes. You show, and that word show there really is more along the lines of your teaching, you're instructing, you're learning, right? If it's just you. But what he's talking about there is we get very caught up in the symbol, right? And people can get so caught up in the symbol, right? The people of Israel were caught up in manna yet without understanding, caught up in the serpent yet without understanding, right? And obviously a symbol or a shadow without the substance, without us, especially today, right? Well, actually applicable to both of us, even before Christ or us, right? The serpent on the pole, in other words, we can look at what happened. They looked at the fiery serpent and they were healed, right? But the purpose of the serpent on the pole was not just that they would be healed, is that they could understand that through Christ they could live, right? That it was to teach them and to instruct them the gospel, that Christ came to give you life and to give it to you more abundantly. In their case, it was that they would be able to learn that Christ would come, and that Christ would come to give them life and to give them life more abundantly, right? But what happens? So the people of Israel see the symbol. They see that it healed them, right? And we saw in, and we're jumping around a little bit, but I think that's okay. Let's go to 2 Kings 18. 2 Kings 18. In verse number 4. Speaking about Hezekiah, it says that Hezekiah, he did right was in the Lord's sight. And in verse number 4, it said that he removed the high places, right, where they would offer, right, to the gods or to Baal or whatever, not to the Lord. And it says, and they broke the sacred pillars, cut down the wooden image, and broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until those days, the children of Israel burned incense to it and called it Nehushtan, right? So they see a symbol, right? What happens when people get a symbol and see something marvelous happen, right? In other words, obviously, when we were just in 1 Corinthians, right, the symbol of communion, where is it that people get that? So, of course, they get that from the Last Supper, right? Jesus broke bread, and he said, this is my body, do this in remembrance of me. So what is it that you can do? You can take a symbol, a shadow, right? And you can make the shadow more than it is intended to be, or you can let the shadow be a semblance, a resemblance of heavenly things, and the substance of heavenly things is Christ, right? Whom we already have. So let me show you that again. You take communion, you take the bronze serpent on the pole, you take manna, right? You take any of these things, you take baptism, you take all of these endless number of things, right? Earthly, worldly things that you can do and see and touch, right? When something is a shadow of the Lord, right? In many places, what it is, it's a shadow of heavenly things. The things of the temple were things that were made after the instruction of God, right? Which was after the image of heavenly things, right? So what Hezekiah saw, he said, they have taken this thing that had a revelation to it. So the bronze serpent was given, right? It was given as a symbol and was intended, right, for people to seek after the Lord, and the Lord would reveal to them the meaning of the serpent on the pole, right? The meaning of the serpent on a pole. It's interesting that even our medical institutions, right, and you see an ambulance go by, right, they have a serpent on a pole, right, which is we've talked about this before, right? And even at home we talk about this thing like that. That is an amazing thing. The medical community that is about making people well, right, has a serpent on a pole. Like somebody had some kind of an inkling to something, an understanding of something, and put that there, right? But if you see, what was it that the people of Israel missed? They began to offer, in other words, they began to make an earthly thing a heavenly thing. And here's an understanding that this is something that we have to get. Earthly things will never be heavenly, right? Earthly things that you see today that are subject to corruption are never heavenly. They are never heavenly. The only people that are earthly that were made heavenly are you and me, right? And obviously the Lord, who was the first one that happened to, right? But earthly things should never be seen ever as heavenly things. Never as heavenly things, because they are not. They are earthly. They are shadows of heavenly things. Yes, they are shadows of heavenly things. So we would say, is there something wrong with communion? No, as long as it's seen as what it is. It is a shadow of a heavenly thing, and the substance, and I'll bring you to that verse, the substance of heavenly things, the substance, in other words, the tangibility of all heavenly things is on the inside of us, who is Christ, right? And I'll bring you to that right now, so that we don't forget. Colossians 2:17, and then we'll see what happens if we might jump back to 2 Kings 18 here, but Colossians 2:17, look at what it says. It says, which are a shadow. It was just speaking of heavenly things. It was talking about food and drink, and it was talking about festivals. It was talking about new moons, Sabbaths, right? All this stuff, right? Christians, right, in general, and other things, other religions that are not Christian have this thing with Sabbath, right? It's an earthly thing. That's an earthly day. An earthly day is never heavenly, right? It's never heavenly. The only people that are heavenly are us, right? We give more importance to the substance, the things that are earthly, that you can ingest, instead of what you already possess, right? We give more importance to learning what we have, what is out here that is seen, that you can touch, instead of the substance that you already have in you, who is Christ. And he says, which are a shadow of things to come, in other words, heavenly things. But the substance, in other words, that thing which is tangible of those heavenly things that you will physically see one day, right? The substance is Christ. In other words, we have received heavenly things already in us. So why would we ever? I was just talking today to my mom, and I was telling her, I said, you know what? I said, Mom, because she brought up Thanksgiving, right? And I told her, you know what? There's absolutely nothing wrong with Thanksgiving. You want to give thanks to the Lord for all the things He's done? That is the cry of my life. Every single day I'm thanking the Lord for everything that He's done, because that is what the gospel is. The gospel makes you thankful for what the Lord has done. You want to do that on Thanksgiving? That's awesome. See, but I don't need to wait for an earthly date, right? I don't need to wait for an earthly date to be the reminder for me that it's a day that I should give thanks to God, right? Because that's why I have the Spirit of God on the inside of me to remind me of all the things that the Lord has done for me. On a regular basis, He lives in me, right? I don't have to wait for the 26th of a certain month or for Christmas to come around or thanking God for the new year and make all these promises to Him about how I'm going to live right when I wasn't able to live right before Jesus, so I can't live right now after Jesus by myself without the Lord anyway. So I don't have to get caught up in promises and resolutions, and I don't have to get caught up in communion, and I don't have to get caught up in anything, because the only one that I have to cling to, the only one that I got to get all tangled up and wound up in is Jesus, right? The knowledge of Christ and Him crucified. And that's the very thing that's said about King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah says he clung to the Lord. He clung to the Lord. He just wanted, you can see the righteous anger of a man. Because he didn't have to be a king, because Gideon wasn't a king, and the same thing got into that man, right? But the righteous anger inside of an individual that sees people worshiping an earthly thing that should be people that have known the Lord long enough to be able to have a clue about what He's showing them, but instead they begin to offer up sacrifices to a bronze thing, to a bronze serpent on a pole, to a physical thing. Right? Instead of giving thanks to the Lord, instead of worshiping God, right? So knowing that you don't need any earthly thing, and I'll say it right now, there is no such thing of a Christian that needs an earthly thing to be saved or to stay saved or to prosper in anything. There is no water baptism. There is no physical communion, right? Listen, it's funny, we get caught up in communion. We get caught up in the part that the Lord didn't say to major on. The major thing that the Lord said to do in 1 Corinthians 10 there was remember me. Remember me. Remembrance is not a thing of your mouth. Remembrance is a thing of your mind, right? And that's not something you have to do to remember. He says as often as you do, in other words, understand the shadow and see the substance that you have, and it will bring you to thanksgiving. Anytime that we see a shadow, we should be able to in the church water baptize people without them getting caught up and think that the Spirit of God is falling all over them when they come out of the water. The water in that tank is not the Spirit of God. That is a symbol of the Spirit of God that washed you and cleansed you of all your unrighteousness. It is not that there is some kind of innate power in a physical earthly thing, right? God works by His Spirit. He doesn't need physical things to work in you, right? He lives on the inside of you. There is no physical thing that God needs to in any way use as an instrument to reach you, right? He lives in you. You are His possession, and your heart should be the Lord's. In other words, that's something that we don't kind of get, right? What was it that David had going for him? A heart for God. What is it that King Hezekiah had going for him? A heart that was for God. What is it Christians have going for them? A heart that is for God, right? A heart that is for God. Is it that there is anything wrong inherently in a symbol? No. But it's that when a symbol, and this is not just my opinion, this is God's opinion. When a symbol of a heavenly thing gets in the way, destroy it, right? When a symbol of a heavenly thing gets in the way, destroy it. It's no good anymore. Right? Let's put it this way. Forget about the bronze serpent. Let's talk about water baptism, right? Let's take, right, that water baptism now. We're going to take, and we believe that the water in this tank, which is just a physical thing, that the water in itself is holy. And if you can just get around from wherever you are in this earth and dunk in our tank, right, you will receive life and you will be born again. In the physical water. The water itself is holy. People forget that they are holy. They think that God somehow is making the water holy, that God sanctifies the water. God sanctified you. God justified you. He don't sanctify water, right? Water is a physical thing that God does not transform from glory to glory. Water is just water. It is a shadow, and the substance is Christ. So if we somehow then sanctify that water, and we say, oh, this water God has sanctified, He has made this holy, and anyone who comes is healed immediately, right? People would say, my gosh, what have you made of water baptism? You've made it this thing, now people think it's not about Jesus. It's not about Jesus saves, it's that the water saves. Exactly, right? But we do that with so many different things. There are Christians that believe that if they just take communion, that they could be made well and receive life. Any person, I don't care who it is, that has ever taken communion and been healed, what healed them was their remembrance of what the Lord had done, and not the bread and not the wine, right? Bread and wine are physical things. They do not heal, right? If they did heal, we wouldn't need Jesus. We could just get drunk and eat bread, right? But that's not how you were made well, right? That's not how we're healed. It's not by sanctified things. God does not make things holy, right? He has made us holy. Anything that God set apart and called it in any way holy, and a sheep, right? There is nothing holy about sheep. There is nothing godly about sheep. Sheep are just sheep. So sacrifices lost their meaning when? Put it this way. Why do Christians not offer sacrifices, animal sacrifices? Why don't we have an altar, and why doesn't the blood run in this church, right? Because the blood already ran, right? Because at least we have come to understand that that was a shadow of Christ, right? A shadow of heavenly things. And when the heavenly things have come, those earthly things can cease. The temple was to stand, right? Until what? Until we were made the temple of God, then it ceased. The temple, watch, the temple was a picture of heavenly things. Yet the Lord said that that temple would stand until the way into heaven was made open, right? Until the way of heaven was made, until Christ, obviously, who is the way, would come. So why don't we today have temples like Solomon's temple? Why today do we not have animal sacrifices? Because we've understood those are shadows, those are earthly things that are shadows of heavenly things, and the substance, what gives tangibility now to us, to those heavenly things, is Christ, who is already on the inside of us. So we've understood that. But how does he not apply to all the other things, right? We can understand animal sacrifice the same way we understand tithing, the same way we understand circumcision, the same way we understand water baptism, right? Water baptism is what? A physical representation of what God has already done in you. He didn't cleanse you of all unrighteousness when you got wet. He cleansed you of all unrighteousness when you received the Spirit of God. That water is a symbol of what Christ did in you by his Spirit, right? So you can do it and give thanks to God, right? But if you're doing it and you don't know, then you're doing that has absolutely no effect. In other words, it's meaningless. It's meaningless. The only thing that gives water baptism meaning, the only thing that gives it any relevance or any importance whatsoever, is if you give thanks to God, right, for the heavenly revelation of what that means, right? Because you know. And if you don't know, then you shouldn't get in the tank, right? So what I'm saying is that he took that. He took that bronze serpent and he broke it, and it's an interesting thing. He didn't throw it into a fire. He didn't break it in half. He didn't bury it. It said he broke it in pieces, right? He broke it into pieces. It's just so that we can see the ridiculousness that there is, how far away, how we can be people that forget. How we can be people that forget. And if you know what? If you are one of those that can take communion, and your mind can be on Christ who is already in you. Christ who is already in you, right? And nothing else. Nothing else. That is a physical thing, and what the only reason for it is that it would be a tool for our mind to be focused, to be able to listen to him and be reminded. To be able to allow the Spirit of God to remind us, right? He broke that bronze serpent into little pieces. Why? Because what they forgot was the revelation. In other words, in their case, probably they never even learned the revelation, right? Because they didn't hear to begin with. They were probably worshiping that serpent on a pole from the day that God used that and performed that work of power, which is just a miracle, right? A work of power is just a miracle. If I'm not saying that miracles don't exist. Miracles can happen all the time. But what happens is when we see, and this is what people do, when people see God do a work of power, they worship the thing that the miracle came through. It doesn't matter if it's a statue. It doesn't matter if the miracle is done through anything. If God multiplied the loaves, then we'll worship bread. If God did something through a statue, we'll worship the statue. If God did things, whenever God does a work of power, he does it. He is his work of power. People don't look at Christ, who is the substance of that power, right? Instead, we look at the things. Or, now here's another example that it can be even more, maybe more tangible to you. There are so many times that Christians, right, we have Christ living right on the inside of us, and we are cloud-minded, right? Cloud-minded. In other words, we think that if we get up on a mountain, we're closer to the Lord. That if you take a helicopter ride, you're closer to Him. That the higher you get, the more peaceful it becomes. No, you know what? It's just the atmosphere. That's all it is. When you get up there, there's just no noise, and it's not more godly, it's just no noise, right? So it's not more godly when you're in a quiet room than you are when you're in a noisy room. It's not more close to God more godly when you're in one or the other, or more godly when you're higher or lower. Why? Because the substance of that which is holy, in other words, the godliness of God is in you. So I don't have to look up to heaven. There was a time, honestly, I used to watch, years ago, I used to see Kenneth Copeland. He always used to pray looking up. And he would put his hands out like this, and he would just look up. And I remember one time, he said it, and then he never did it again anyway. But I remember this one time, this is probably like 20 years ago. I remember him saying specifically, he said, I don't know why I always look up. Because the Lord is right here on the inside of me, right? Is there anything wrong with looking up? No, probably not. No, not anything wrong with looking up as long as you know He's in you, right? Is there anything wrong with communion? Is there anything wrong with it? Because that's what people always say. Is there anything wrong with that? Listen, why do you need to find out if there's anything wrong with something? Just concentrate on the Lord, and you don't have to worry about where the line is, right? Just put your mind on the Lord, and the Lord will show you the significance of things. And once you see things in their true light, it is what it is, right? It's just Welch's grape juice and a little thing that I don't even know what material the thing is made of, right? I don't know what those wafers are made out of. They're made out of, it tastes like they're made of styrofoam, right? But people look at that, and it's almost like, that's the holy wine. Like, almost like you can take that, and if you have wrinkles, you can just kind of put it on your wrinkles, and your wrinkles go away if you put the grape juice on you. What is that? That's ridiculous stupidity, right? Because it is an earthly thing, and all you did was put grape juice on your face, right? You don't get healed because you use earthly things. You don't get saved because you kill a sheep, right? You don't get healed because you have a bronze serpent on a pole in your home hanging on a wall, right? You don't get good luck because you kiss a crucifix, take it out and put it on your face and kiss it, right? These things are earthly things, and they will all burn. You can take a Bible that is written, and you can rub it on your face, or you can put it in the center of your house, and it won't bring you more good luck than anything else does, right? You might as well just have a rabbit's foot into it, because that's the significance that it has as far as it being a good luck charm, right? It does nothing. It does nothing. Right? The Bible it's just the inspired word of God written on a book. What is important are the things that He said, not the book that contains it, right? It's what He said. It's what He said. So if your Bible is falling apart and you throw it in the garbage and you get a new one, good for you that you're still reading your Bible and being reminded of the things that the Lord has said and allowing Him to teach you, right? But people, God forbid that any Christian would ever be seen throwing a Bible away. Like, you almost have to treat it like you treat a flag. Like, you would never burn a flag. But we are listen, carnality is not just sinful thoughts, right? Carnality is being natural about everything that you believe and do, right? So natural people that don't major on Christ and Him crucified, what happens? That you take a hold of physical things, and physical things begin to have great significance. And what I am saying, right, what we're talking about here today, and people that are listening, right, is, are you willing to throw away the insignificance of earthly things for the significance of who He is, right? And allow Him to teach you who He is. And what will happen is you'll see all of these things in their right light. Is there anything wrong with churches doing communion? Of course not, no. As long as the people that are taking communion know what it represents, right? As long as the people that are getting water baptized, right, know what it is. Paul didn't water baptize much of any. Actually, when people came to him talking about water baptism, he says, I'm glad I didn't water baptize any of you, right? Because it's not about how many people do you baptize. It doesn't make you or hold your church because you have water baptism or you have communion, right? I mean, we have this thing, right? Today's Communion Sunday. So people will come out of the woodwork because it's Communion Sunday. Like, it wasn't important enough to come yesterday when you were preaching the gospel, but this is Communion Sunday. You don't want to miss that, because remember, it's good luck when you do that, right? It's just physical stuff. It's just physical things. And when a physical thing gets in the way of the substance who is Christ, it is better to be burned. It's better to break it up into little, tiny little pieces and never allow anyone next to it so that they can forget the ridiculousness about the physical thing and allow the Lord to teach them the reality. See, it's not about teaching a Christian heaven. It's about teaching a Christian the substance of heaven that they already have, how they all have already been made heavenly, right? You are already a citizen of that country. You have already received your inheritance. These are things that you will see one day physically, right? But you already possess them today, right? And we have come into the things, we have tasted of the power of the age to come. We have experienced the power of the age to come as the church around the world, time and time again. The church experiences the power of the age to come. In other words, the church experiences the power of God, and then we end up worshiping the physical thing. If there's a work of God's power in Florida, we go to Florida. If there's a work of God's power over here, we go over there, right? But we don't see that what he's trying to teach us every single time God does any work of power is to teach us Christ. Let me show you something. Let me show you something. If we can go real quick to 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse number 21. I'm not actually sure if this is New King James. I'll just turn to it here. 1 Corinthians 1, 21. You know, it's interesting that, you would hear something like this and you would say, Pastor Jose, why do you have to call something that the Lord told us to do? And how do you think that that's right to call it something that is no longer of use, that you would call it useless, that you say that it's good to be burned, to never be done again, right? But here's the thing. Again, this is not, put yourself in the Lord's shoes, right? He sent his one and only son to go and save you. He brought to pass, right? He came to become the substance so people could see what all of those shadows represented, right? He went to the cross to show you the true meaning. In other words, he took communion prior to going to the cross. He fulfilled that communion on that cross. He said, this is my body which is given for you. He hadn't given his body yet, right? He was prophesying about something that was to come. So do you think if you asked God and you said, Lord, I believe this to be a holy thing, right? Is this a holy thing or is Christ the Holy One, right? Because they both aren't. Because they both are not, right? Christ, the Lord did not say, do this, and say, then, you know what? Make that a ritual. Make that something that you worship. Make that something that you believe has any significance in and of itself, that if you do this one thing, you are doing something. Listen, if you take communion and you haven't remembered him, you have done nothing. And it's not about saying that when you take communion, I'm remembering you, Jesus. No, the remembering is done by the Spirit of God. The remembering is done by the Spirit of God. He is the one that brings to your remembrance, right, all of the things, right, that he receives from the Lord. He said he will not speak on his own, but anything that he receives from me, he'll say it to you. Anything he receives from me, he'll say it to you. So it's the Lord wanting to remind the church, right? In other words, to continue to reveal himself. He said in John 14, he said, I will manifest myself to you. I will come, I will return, I make my home in you, and I will reveal myself to you. When anything takes the place of Christ revealing himself, it's no good anymore. Right? Because that thing lost its significance when he came to live in you, right? It is his job to reveal himself to you. It has always been the job of God to reveal himself. Now, he used many physical things in order to be able to use them just as tools because of the ignorance of the human heart and not because God needed to do it that way. It was because of our hardness of heart, because if we knew God fully, we don't need any of that stuff. We don't need any of it. When faith is gone and we know him fully, you don't need any of it. Why do you not need any of it? Because what's the purpose of doing anything? You have everything. right? You have manifested all things already, right? But today that we possess the inheritance, we possess Christ, we possess the inheritance, we don't see what the Lord is saying, right? You have given more importance to that than you do to me, right? In other words, you have forgotten me. Remember, he said, when you come into your inheritance, when you have been filled with all good things, remember that I am the one that's prospering you. But then we take and we see Christians prospering, and then we create a movement about people that want to prosper and get lots of money. And then we teach people that it's by you giving that you become prosperous. What have we forgotten? The one that gives you the power. In other words, we thought that prosperity came from giving instead of prosperity coming from God, right? That's what we've forgotten. When we talk about communion and water baptism and those examples, what is it that we've forgotten? We forgot the Christ who is the one that baptized us, right? He says in 1 Corinthians 1:21, it says, for since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God. In other words, what he's saying is that God would never allow any individual without revelation from the Spirit of God to ever know him. You can't. You'll never know him. So that means that by natural physical things, you can never know God. You can never know. A natural physical thing will never bring you any closer to God ever. You are not closer to God. You don't know him more because you got a physical thing. The only way to ever know God more, or to even have a sense in your heart and your physical mind closer to the Lord, right, is by revelation of the Spirit of God. Your mind is never renewed by anything physical. Never. So there is no symbol. There is nothing you can touch. There is nothing that you can touch physically that you can say, that is going to renew my mind. That is going to make me know God more. Nothing that you can touch in this world can ever do that. The only thing that can ever do that is the Spirit of God, right? So obviously that teaches us that there really is truly no need for anything physical, right, that we would practice other than listening to the Lord. Because the Lord he didn't say love the Lord your God and practice that. He didn't say love the Lord your God and make sure you do this every other Sunday. He didn't say love the Lord your God. He said just love me. But what happens? We have forgotten, right? See, the problem with this is the same problem that there is in everything else, right? That it's just that we forget, right? We get into churches and we begin to preach good messages, and then we go off the deep end somewhere because because of the pressure that people bring, because they want you to teach this or that and the other thing, because of the pressure of the denomination hierarchy that wants you to teach a certain curriculum, because of whatever it is, right, that comes down, that we have forgotten the Lord our God, right? We've forgotten the Lord our God. Where we were just now, in 1 Corinthians 1:21, for since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. How did he save them? Through the foolishness of the message preached. He's going to tell you a second what that message preached should be, right? The message that is preached that brings salvation, the message that is preached that brings wholeness to people's bodies, the message that is preached. In other words, there is a message that can be preached that people are able to hear and partake of all of the things that have been given to them already, right? And if you don't have them, then you can receive him then, right? It says, the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. In verse number 22, for Jews request a sign, right? And Jews will request a sign, and if a sign is given, they would worship the sign. Greeks seek after wisdom. And if you could know God through conventional worldly wisdom, like the Greeks seek, it said, right? Which it is, right? Here what we're talking about, obviously, is the world seeks, right? The world that would try to know God through growing in intellectual knowledge, if they could know God through that, then they would worship intellectualism, right? They would worship knowledge, right? But God made it so that nor through a sign, nor through a symbol would you ever know God. Instead, through the message that is preached. He says the Jews request a sign, and it's not given to them. The Greeks seek after wisdom, and they don't receive it. But we preach Christ crucified. But we preach Christ crucified. To the ones that want a sign, Christ crucified is a stumbling block. You see how interesting that is? To people that love the signs, that love to point to the physical things. To them, it says the gospel is a stumbling block, and to the Greeks, it's foolishness. To them that are intellectual, the gospel is ridiculous. It's foolishness. To those that want sign, that want things to touch with their hands in order to believe, to them, right, the message is a stumbling block, right? In other words, it's something that gets in their way. It's something that is not in accordance with what they want, right? It's a stumbling block. It's a stumbling block. But we preach Christ crucified. It says to the Jews a stumbling block and to the Greeks foolishness, but to those who are called, which we are, right? Every Christian, right? Both Jews and Greeks, Christ then becomes what? The power of God, the wisdom of God. The power of God and the wisdom of God. See, so there would be, for all those that say, but is there anything wrong in this? Here's what I would say. Is there anything wrong with you just listening to the Lord, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I would encourage you, listen to the Lord. Because can I tell you something? Most people are too immature to take communion. Most people are too immature to be baptized in water. Most people are too immature to have symbols in their church, right? Because people will take those symbols and they will worship the symbol. That's where you see the Lord saying, right after actually, that was First Corinthians 1. The very next chapter, which is just a continuation of the exact same letter, the same one that said, but I preach Christ crucified. I preach Christ crucified is the same one that said, for I determined to know nothing among you except Christ and him crucified. That's 1 Corinthians 2:2. I determined to know nothing, right, except Christ and him crucified. Why? That wasn't a one-off thing where he was saying just to the Corinthian church, that's my attitude towards you. I just preach Jesus to you. It says that there is nothing else to preach other than Christ and him crucified, right? And the glory, in other words, the substance of the shadow that we have today. The substance of the shadow that we have today. That is what's important. That is the good news that people need to hear, not get all caught up in all of these symbols to the point where people come into a church and you don't do communion or you don't do water baptism. You know what? We don't do either here and haven't done it for a long time. And we won't until, and I don't even know when we will, right? Because honestly, I don't see right now where it's profitable for the church. Because I'm not looking at this church. I'm looking at the church around the world. It's not a profitable practice. It's not a profitable practice. It's not a profitable practice when people have come into this church and got dunked in water and I asked them a year later when they got saved, and it says, the day that you baptized me in water. So you think that getting in the tank saved you? Like, I don't even know if you're saved now then, right? I don't even know if you're saved right now, because that's not what saves, right? Baptism in water does not save. So when people get caught up, where you may not be burning incense to something, but when it has become that significant, when you are highly offended, right? If somebody throws out a book, then you have a problem, right? You have issues with the way that you think that God has sanctified a physical thing, and yet what he wants you to, listen, the only reason why the Bible was written is so that people would be able to have a means to teach the gospel.
We hope you enjoyed this message from Reformed Church. If you have, please share this with someone else and help us get this unpopular message to the world. If you'd like to support Reformed Church, you can do so at reforminus.com/give. Also on our website, you can take advantage of our free messages, articles, and even full discipleship courses. Start reforming your mind now at reforminus.com.